Parshas Vayikra begins the Chumash, the volume of the 5 books of Moses of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah by the same name. So the Torah begins by saying, this is now the second verse. This is chapter 1, verse 2. That's Perek Aleph, Pasuk Beis. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'mar talehem. This is Hashem speaking to Moshe. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Adam, a person, ki akriv mikem korban l'Hashem. When he brings of you, we're going to booknote that, korban l'Hashem, an offering to Hashem, min ha-behema, min ha-bakar, u'min ha-tzon takrivos korbanchem. He shall offer your offering of the livestock from the herd and from the flock, meaning from what we would call cattle or from sheep or goats. So the first question we have is this verse seems to be sliced and diced the wrong way. There's this word mikem, which in a different order, if it were placed elsewhere in the verse, it would make sense. It would make more immediate sense. But it says here, Adam ki akriv mikem korban Hashem. Now I'm reading one of the translations, when any one of you offers an offering to Hashem. Well, that would be the most reasonable reading if it said, Adam mikem, a person among you, ki akriv korban Hashem, when he brings an offering to Hashem. Or flip it and say, ki akriv Adam mikem korban Hashem, if a person of you brings an offering to Hashem. But we have a strange order of the words. It doesn't say Adam mikem, a person of you. It says Adam ki akriv mikem korban Hashem. Person when he brings of you a korban, an offering to Hashem. Why? So some say it means that it has to be your property. It can't be stolen, can't be borrowed, has to be yours. The animal that you bring as an offering must be yours. Okay. There's another explanation, that of the Elshich, but we're going to back up and talk about what are korbanos, what are animal offerings all about to begin with. To the modern ear, it strikes us as primitive. So what's going on? Animal sacrifice. It sounds like something that the ancients did and that the modern sensibility might reject. What's it all about? So we have several different opinions. And we have to preface all of these opinions by saying that whenever it comes to performing a mitzvah, although there may be rationales for the mitzvahs, frequently referred to as ta'amei ha-mitzvos, or the Sefer HaChinuch refers to as the shoroshim, the sources, ta'amei ha-mitzvos, meaning the reasons, or tam is a taste of the mitzvah. We do not view them, first of all, we never assume that we can read the divine mind, and therefore, when we offer a reason, we never presume that it is the entire reason. We might actually consider it more of a consequence rather than a reason. Rabbi Ahron Soloveichik points out that when you put it, the risk of attributing reasons or motivations for divine commandments is that the significance of the divine commandment gets diminished, and it is viewed only as a means to an end. We want to avoid that. If Hashem says to do it, we do it. It's Ritzon Haborei. If it's what Hashem wants, we do it. We don't do it conditionally. We don't do it conditioned upon our understanding of why we do it. However, we also believe that the mitzvahs come to teach us lessons. And there are many svarim, there are many works written by venerable authors who offer suggested rationales for the mitzvahs. And because korbanos are unusual in our experience, and that's largely because we no longer have the temple, may be rebuilt speedily in our days, but for 2,000 years we haven't had the temple, we haven't had the Beis Mikdash. We have not witnessed or experienced, more importantly, the bringing of korbanos, offerings. So we have to delve a little bit deeper than we would, for example, as we spoke about last week and weeks previous, about Shabbos, which we experience every week. So we can talk about that from experience. Here, we can only speak about korbanos from afar. What is the rationale? For those who do give rationales for the korbanos, what's going on? So the Rambam, famously, Moreh Nevuchim, in the third chelek, the third volume of his Guide for the Perplexed, the Rambam says that the institution of korbanos is really as a response to or an antidote to the tendency among certain peoples at the time of the Torah to offer offerings to idols, or as pagan worship, as avodah zarah. So he said the Mitzrim, for example, the Egyptians would worship the sheep, and we know this as part of our tradition is offered as a rationale for why it is specifically the sheep that we use as the Korban Pesach, as the Paschal offering, the Paschal lamb. There are other societies, he points out, that to this day treat cows as sacred and won't touch them, won't hurt them. And they're the Kasdim, the Chaldeans, who served the goats. They served what the Rambam calls shedim, apparitions, some kind of perceived spiritual force, and they viewed them in the shape of a goat, for example. The Rambam says to expunge that tendency from our hearts or from the human hearts, Hashem co-opted that urge and turned those animals into objects of service to him instead. Now, the Ramban fiercely argues with the Rambam, and he says it's simply not a legitimate explanation. He says they're divrei havai. And one of the proof texts that he offers is that frequently the Torah talks about reach nichoach l'ratzon, that it's a pleasing smell to Hashem. It's pleasing generally to Hashem. A separate question about why anything physical would be pleasing to Hashem. We probably won't have the opportunity to discuss that now, but the Ramban says that he says the korbanos are inherently pleasing to Hashem, and he cites as an example when Noach exited the ark, he brought offerings, and that was before there were any Mitzrayim or Kasdim. There were no Egyptians or Chaldeans around, or people who consider cows to be sacred, and nevertheless he brought offerings. So we see that offerings exist independent of this reaction response co-opting of a tendency towards heathen or avodah zarah practices. Rather, he says the process of bringing korban, which includes smicha, which is putting the hands on the head of the animal, and vidui, which is confessing sins, and sreifa, the burning, person should think as he sees the dismembered animal that really should be happening to him. Frequently, korbanos are brought as kapara, as atonement for sin, and on the basis of strict justice, somebody who steps out of line should be pulled from the game. And a person who sins, from one perspective at least, he defaults, and he gives up on his right to continued existence. So seeing the animal in this condition might prick the consciousness of the person who brings it and turn him around. And the ultimate goal is closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that may be implicit in the word korban. Korban comes from the word, the shoresh. The root of the word is kufresh beis korev, which means to bring closer. It could mean that you bring the animal on the altar, on the mizbeach, but it could also mean that a person, through the act of bringing a korban, gets closer to Hashem. The Meshech Chochma suggests that there's actually, he offers an explanation that would accept both explanations, and he says that when animals are brought on private altars, which are referred to as bamos, that likely is along the theme of the Rambam, which is to take that urge to sacrifice an animal, perhaps to the wrong source, and to direct that towards Hashem. He says that's not applicable in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, he says the theme would be more like the Ramban. The Sefer HaChinuch actually says that it's one thing to simply admit your sin. It's another thing to go through an elaborate process as a result of your sin, which involves the whole process of slaughtering an animal, skinning the animal, dismembering the animal, sprinkling its blood on the altar, that will cause a person to contemplate the consequences of sin and the severity of sin. And lastly, the Meshech Chochma, in a second explanation, says that this process, which could be distressing or even repulsive, the nature of taking a living being and killing it, creates powerful imagery about the ultimate futility of simple physical existence divorced from its spiritual or moral content, which is afforded by the Torah. And so it's a reinforcing of the notion that there's a human being inside the human being. There's a soul. There's a being that thinks and that feels and that can become close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this shocking experience of killing and dismembering an animal is designed to shake us up and to have us contemplate the meaning of life. Sometimes we do it just by seeing a dead squirrel, roadkill on the road. How much more so when it's a deliberate and elaborate process. Getting back to mikem, this word mikem, adam ki akriv mikem, the Elshich says, and my Rabbi Rav Ahron Soloveichik used to emphasize this, that without the mikem of you, your self, your hachna, your submission, your recognition, your humbling yourself, when you bring your own kishkas, your own guts to the process, to the experience of bringing a korban, that is what achieves the ultimate end goal of the korbanos, which is to strip away the shell that we encase ourselves in and to penetrate to the extent possible our inner core and to connect that through the offering of korbanos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is why this verse says, Adam, an individual, ki akriv, when he brings mikem of his self, his selves, as a korban. When we bring the animal as a korban, we are in a virtual way bringing ourselves as a korban as well. And if we do, and if we achieve closeness, we got everything. Have a good chance.